My name is Eleanor Hayes. I am 63 years old, and 3 months ago I walked into a small camera shop, carrying the last thing my husband ever touched, a vintage Leica M6, still loaded with film. Tom Bennett, the photographer who ran the shop, had known Harold and me for more than 30 years. He was the kind of man who smelled faintly of coffee and darkroom chemicals, and who never raised his voice. But that morning when he saw the camera in my hands, his expression changed. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "whatever's on this roll, don't show it to anyone else." Those words stayed with me long after I left his shop. Our farmhouse sat on 12 acres outside a quiet town in Pennsylvania. Harold and I had lived there for 42 years. He'd built the barn himself, fixed every fence post by hand, and always said he wanted to die on this land. He did. A heart attack, they said. He'd been checking the eastern fence line, the one that bordered the woods. The paramedics found him lying beside a fallen post, his camera still hanging around his neck. Harold had become obsessed with photography during his final year. Every morning before sunrise, he'd walk the property taking pictures of tree bark, spider webs, and the way light touched the old fence rails. Our daughter, Claire, said it was a sign of aging, of losing focus. Our son, Michael, called it a harmless hobby. But I saw something else in him, a quiet determination, as if he were trying to see the world again before it was too late. For 3 months after the funeral, I left that camera on the kitchen table. Some mornings I'd reach for it, and then stop, afraid of what I might find if I developed the film. It felt like opening a door I couldn't close again. But grief has a strange way of turning fear into curiosity. One July morning, when the light fell across the table just so, I picked up the Leica. The leather strap was worn smooth from Harold's hands, still warm in memory if not in truth. I thought I was about to develop memories. I was wrong. I was about to develop evidence. Tom called me 2 days later. His voice was tight, formal, nothing like the man who used to tease Harold about still using film in a digital world. "Eleanor," he said, "you need to come by the shop, alone." When I arrived, the blinds were drawn. The faint chemical smell from the darkroom hung in the air. Tom stood behind the counter with a small stack of prints, his hands trembling slightly. "I shouldn't even be showing you these," he murmured. "But you deserve to know." The first few photos were harmless sunlight on the barn roof, the apple trees in bloom, the wooden gate half open. Then came a close-up of our mailbox. Its lock was bent, as if someone had tried to pry it open. Another photo showed deep tire tracks cutting across the wet dirt near the shed, tracks from heavy vehicles we'd never owned. My stomach tightened. "What was he looking for?" I whispered. Tom didn't answer. He simply handed me the next print. It showed a black SUV parked halfway in the woods, its license plate gleaming in the flash. I recognized it instantly. It belonged to Robert Lang, president of the local bank, and to his son Evan, my son-in-law. The final photo made me grip the counter for balance. Harold had taken it from a distance, the lens slightly out of focus, but the faces were unmistakable. Robert and Evan stood at the edge of the woods, leaning over a map, their expressions serious. The timestamp on the back read the same morning Harold died. Tom reached over, resting a hand on mine. "Whatever Harold stumbled into, Eleanor," he said softly, "it wasn't just business. It was money and danger." I drove home in silence, the prints on the seat beside me. Every mile of road felt longer than the last. By the time I pulled into our driveway, one thought had carved itself into my chest. Harold hadn't just been taking pictures, he'd been documenting a threat. When I got home that evening, Claire's car was already in the driveway. I wasn't expecting her or her husband, but there they were waiting at my kitchen table like they owned the place. A folder sat between them, neat and white, the kind banks use when they're about to close a deal. "Mom," Claire began, her voice too cheerful, "we wanted to check on you. And we have some good news." Evan smiled, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "Robert's been thinking about you," he said. "He knows the property must be hard to manage alone. He's offering to buy the whole place. $2 million cash. You could move into town, somewhere comfortable." The number echoed in my head, cold and heavy. Harold and I had turned down smaller offers for years, determined to keep the land in the family. The soil wasn't just dirt to us, it was memory. The swing Harold built for the kids, the oak tree where we'd carved our initials, it all lived here. Claire reached for my hand. "You deserve rest, Mom. Dad would have wanted you to be safe." Safe. That word slid through the air like a blade. Harold's heart had stopped out there, in the same woods Robert and Evan had been standing in. Safe was the last thing this offer felt like. "I'm not selling," I said quietly. Evan's smile thinned. "Mrs. Hayes, the world's changing. Developers will come either way. Better to walk away on your own terms." He pushed the folder toward me, a single sheet showing the offer. I didn't touch it. My pulse beat in my ears, steady and defiant. Claire sighed. "Please think about it," she said softly, but her tone wasn't a request. It was a warning wrapped in daughterly concern. After they left, I stood at the window and watched their car disappear down the road. The sky was bruised purple, the fields dark and still. In that moment I realized something simple and terrifying. Kindness can be a mask, and offers like that are rarely gifts, they're ultimatums dressed as favors. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Harold's camera, the SUV in the photo, and the folder Evan had left on the table. Around midnight I got up, made tea I didn't drink, and stared out the window toward the barn. The eastern shed sat behind it, half swallowed by the trees, dark, silent, forgotten. In one of Harold's last photos, I'd noticed something strange, a glint of metal near the shed door, like a lock that had been forced. The image haunted me until I finally slipped on my jacket, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped outside. The grass was damp, the air sharp with the smell of pine and earth. Each crunch beneath my boots made me flinch. The shed looked ordinary enough, same peeling red paint, same slanted roof, but when I ran my fingers over the padlock, I realized the latch wasn't secured. Someone had snapped it, then hooked it back in place to look untouched. Inside, the air was stale. Dust drifted in my flashlight beam like ash. Shelves that once held Harold's tools were mostly empty, except for a cracked coffee mug and a few nails scattered on the floor. Then my light caught a plastic bag wedged behind a loose board. Inside the bag was a small brass key, a folded note, and a photo of Harold smiling beside our truck. The note was written in his steady hand. "If you're reading this, Ellie, something happened. They've seen me watching. Keys Deposit Box 312, Harrisburg Bank. Don't trust anyone until you see what's inside." My throat closed. I pressed the note to my chest and sat there, surrounded by the smell of oil and old wood. I didn't even realize my flashlight had dimmed until darkness filled the room again. Then I heard a soft crack from outside, tires crushing gravel. I froze. The beam of headlights slid briefly across the wall through a gap in the boards. I turned off the light, barely breathing. The engine idled for a few seconds, then rolled away into the distance. When the silence finally settled, I understood what Harold must have felt in those final days. That quiet certainty that someone was watching, waiting for him to make the wrong move. By sunrise, I was already on the road to Harrisburg. The brass key hung from a ribbon around my neck, warm against my skin. The drive took nearly 2 hours, every mile filled with questions I couldn't answer. At the bank, a young teller led me to a small, windowless room with gray walls and a single table. She placed a steel box in front of me and left. The number etched on the side, 312, matched Harold's note. My hands shook as I turned the key. Inside was a manila envelope packed with papers, photos, and a small voice recorder. On the top, in Harold's handwriting, were the words, "In case I don't make it home." The documents were copies of land surveys, corporate letters, and legal forms. I recognized our property listed alongside several others. A report from a geological firm showed test results, natural gas reserves deep under our farmland. And then came a set of unsigned agreements granting drilling rights to a company I'd never heard of. Lang Energy Development, LLC. My heart pounded. Lang, as in Robert Lang. I pressed play on the recorder. The static faded, replaced by Harold's voice, steady but strained. "They came again today, said it's just business. But they're not asking any more? They're warning me. Robert says he can make this go away if I stop talking. Evan told me old men have heart attacks all the time." I covered my mouth. It felt like Harold was sitting across from me, whispering from the grave. I listened to the recording twice, then gathered everything back into the envelope. My reflection in the steel table didn't look like me, it looked older, harder, carved by betrayal. When I walked out of the bank, the sunlight felt wrong, too bright, too clean. The world kept moving, cars passing, people chatting, while I carried proof that my husband had been murdered. For weeks I'd believed Harold's camera was a piece of his art, his way of saying goodbye. But now I knew the truth. He wasn't taking pictures for beauty, he was taking them for survival. When I returned home from Harrisburg, 2 cars were parked in the driveway. Claire, Evan, and my son Michael were waiting on the porch. Their smiles were too wide, their voices too polite. "Mom," Michael began, "we were worried. You didn't answer your phone all day." "I went to the city," I said flatly. "Had some things to take care of." Evan stepped forward, a folder in hand. "That's actually why we're here. My father asked me to bring you an updated offer. He's willing to go up to $2.5 million, but he needs your answer soon." Claire chimed in, "Mom, this could change everything. You could travel, live near us. Please, don't make this harder than it needs to be." I looked at them, my children, the people Harold had loved most, and felt a sharp ache behind my ribs. They didn't see a mother grieving, they saw an obstacle. "I said I'm not selling," I replied. Michael's tone hardened. "Mom, be reasonable. The county's rezoning, developers are lining up. If you don't sign, you'll lose the chance to walk away with anything." Evan smiled slightly. "And if you wait too long, Mrs. Hayes, we might have to pursue other ways to secure access. Legal ways." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. For the first time I saw it clearly, their plan, their greed, their certainty that I was too old and too tired to fight back. "Get out," I said quietly. Claire's eyes filled with tears. "You're making a mistake," she whispered, but I didn't move. After they left, I sat alone in the kitchen until dusk. The sun dipped behind the hills, and the house fell into shadow. Then I heard a soft scrape at the door. An envelope slid under it, no name, no address. Inside was a single note, written in neat block letters. "Take the offer. Leave while you can." My hands trembled, but my resolve didn't. If they wanted to scare me, they'd chosen the wrong woman. By the time the clock struck midnight, I'd made my decision. I would stop hiding. It was time to find someone who could help me tell the truth. The next morning, I drove to the nearest diner in town, the kind with cracked vinyl seats and coffee that never runs out. I had called ahead and asked to meet someone named Nina Qualls, an investigative journalist who'd written a series about environmental corruption in the county. She arrived exactly on time, tall, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who made you believe she'd seen too much to be surprised by anything. She slid into the booth across from me. "You said it's about land rights," she began, "and that people are trying to push you off your property." "It's about more than that," I said, opening Harold's envelope. "It's about a man who tried to expose them and ended up dead." For the next hour I told her everything about the photos, the bank box, the recorder, the threats. I showed her the documents and the transcripts I'd made of Harold's voice. Nina didn't interrupt once. She only took notes and asked for copies. When I finished, she leaned back, exhaled, and said quietly, "This isn't small, Eleanor. What you have here could shake up half the county. But if we go forward, there's no turning back. You need to be ready for that." I looked at her straight on. "They already took my husband. They can't take my silence too." Nina nodded slowly, as if testing the weight of my resolve. "Then we'll do it right. I'll verify every name, every company, every signature. You'll stay quiet until we publish. And when it hits, it'll be undeniable." We met twice more over the next week. She brought her legal team. I brought coffee and courage I didn't know I still had. Each night after she left, I sat by the window, staring into the woods where Harold had fallen, whispering to him like he could still hear me. When Nina finally called to say, "It's ready," I felt both fear and relief twist together in my chest. The truth was about to have a voice again, and this time it would be loud enough for everyone to hear. The story broke on a Sunday morning. The front page of the Philadelphia Inquirer carried a headline in bold letters. "Drilling for dollars, the secret land deals behind a Pennsylvania death dot." I read it twice before I could breathe. Nina's article laid out everything: Robert Lang's fake development company, the falsified surveys, the threats Harold had recorded. She included copies of the documents, timestamps from the photographs, and even a quote from the county clerk confirming the drilling permit applications. It was all there, printed in black and white for the world to see. By noon, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, neighbors, even old friends called, asking if it was true. The local news vans parked on the road outside our gate. The sheriff's department announced a preliminary investigation. For the first time in months, I felt something close to hope. Robert Lang and his son Evan released a statement calling the story a tragic misunderstanding. They said Harold's death had nothing to do with business, and that I was a grieving widow manipulated by media sensationalism. I turned off the television. I didn't need their denials. I had Harold's voice, his proof, and now the world had it too. That night I stayed at Nina's apartment in the city. The lights from the street filtered through the curtains, painting the walls gold. She poured 2 cups of coffee and said, "You did it, Eleanor. It's out there now." I smiled faintly. "No," I said, "we did it." We sat in silence for a long time, listening to the city hum below. My heart was racing, but my hands were steady. For the first time since Harold's funeral, I didn't feel afraid. The storm had started, and there was no stopping it now. Within a week, the district attorney opened a full investigation. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, and the Lang family vanished from public view. Rumors spread quickly about bribes, missing records, and the sudden resignation of a county inspector who had approved the drilling permits. Then, 2 months after the article, the call came. The coroner's office had agreed to exhume Harold's body. I drove to the cemetery with Nina by my side, the air sharp with the first hint of winter. We didn't speak. There are no words for that kind of moment, the dread of confirmation, the fragile hope that maybe, somehow, you're wrong. The results came back a week later. Traces of digoxin, a heart medication Harold had never been prescribed, were found in his bloodstream. The dose was high enough to stop a healthy man's heart. Evan Lang was arrested first. He confessed under pressure, admitting that his father had paid a local contractor to teach Harold a lesson. The plan had been to scare him, not kill him, but something went wrong. The contractor, a man named Keel Mercer, took a plea deal and led the police straight to Robert Lang's estate. I watched on television as Robert was led out in handcuffs, his once perfect composure shattered under flashing cameras. The man who had built an empire on fear and intimidation now looked small, just another coward exposed by the truth. The trial was long, messy, and painful, but in the end both father and son were sentenced. The prosecutor read Harold's final recording aloud in court. No one moved, no one breathed. When it was over, Nina turned to me and whispered, "You got your justice." I shook my head. "Justice isn't joy," I said quietly. "It's peace, and peace is enough." Winter settled over the valley like a long sigh. Snow covered the fields, softening the scars left by trucks and survey stakes. The house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet, one that felt earned. I spent the first weeks after the trial putting things back where they belonged. Harold's camera returned to its spot on the kitchen table. His photographs, once tucked away in boxes, now lined the hallway, snapshots of light, fields, and simple beauty. They no longer felt like evidence. They felt like home. Claire divorced Evan soon after his sentencing. She called me one evening, her voice trembling. "I didn't know, Mom. I swear I didn't." I believed her. Grief had blinded her, just as love had blinded me. Forgiveness didn't come easily, but it came. Michael visited next. He didn't speak much, just stood in the barn doorway and said, "Dad would have been proud." I think that was his way of saying sorry. On the first day of spring, I walked the fence line alone. The earth was thawing, the air cool and clean. When I reached the spot where Harold had fallen, I placed a single white lily in the grass. "We did it," I whispered. "We finished what you started." For the first time, I didn't cry. The wind carried the smell of new soil, and I felt something shift inside me, something like peace. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that silence protects no one. Truth may come late, but it comes. And sometimes the quietest voices can shake the loudest powers. So if you believe truth still matters, share this story. Tell someone that courage doesn't fade with age, it only gets stronger.